The mechanic woke up before sunrise, as he always did. The small room he lived in was quiet, except for the sound of traffic far away and the slow ticking of an old clock on the wall. The place smelled faintly of oil and metal, a smell that had followed him for years and never really left his clothes or his skin. He sat up on the narrow bed and rubbed his tired eyes. His back ached, and his hands were already sore, even though the day had not started yet. He lived behind his garage, in a space that was once used for storage. Over time, he had cleaned it enough to fit a bed, a chair, and a small table. The walls were thin, and in winter, the cold crept in no matter how many blankets he used. But it was all he had, and he was grateful to have a roof over his head. He washed his face with cold water from the sink and looked at himself in the cracked mirror. His hair had more gray now than black. His eyes looked older than his age. He had once dreamed of owning a proper workshop, maybe even hiring someone to help him. Life had other plans. Repairs came and went. Some days were busy, some days empty. He never knew which it would be. By mid-morning, he opened the garage. The door made a loud grinding sound as it lifted. The sign above it was faded and chipped, barely readable. Cars stopped by only when they had no better option. People knew he was cheap and that he would never turn anyone away if they were truly stuck. That was both his strength and his weakness. That day was slow. One car came in with brake trouble. Another needed a quick fix that brought in very little money. By late afternoon, his stomach was already tight with hunger. He had skipped breakfast, as usual, and lunch was nothing more than a cup of tea. He counted the money in his pocket. It was just enough for one simple meal at the small diner down the street. Nothing more. As the sun began to set, he closed the garage earlier than usual. There was no more work coming in, and he felt too tired to wait. He washed his hands, wiped the grease from his arms, and locked the door. The streetlights flickered on as he walked toward the diner, thinking about warm food and a quiet place to sit for a few minutes. When he turned the corner, he noticed someone sitting near the diner's back wall. At first, he thought it was just another person waiting for a ride. But as he got closer, he saw it was a young girl. She couldn't have been more than a teenager. She was wrapped in a thin jacket that looked too big for her. Her shoulders were hunched, and her hands rested on her belly. She was pregnant. He slowed his steps. Something about the way she sat there, still and silent, made his chest feel heavy. She stared at the ground, not asking for anything, not even looking at people passing by. Her face was pale, and her lips looked dry. It was clear she hadn't eaten in a while. He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. He was not a man who interfered in other people's lives. He barely managed his own. But he also knew what hunger felt like. He knew what it meant to have no one. He cleared his throat gently so as not to scare her. She looked up quickly, her eyes wide with fear at first. When she saw his tired face and grease-stained clothes, her expression softened just a little. "Are you okay?" he asked, keeping his voice low and calm. She nodded at first, then shook her head. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was weak and unsure. He glanced at the diner door behind her. "Have you eaten today?" She hesitated. Her hand tightened on her jacket. "Not really." He reached into his pocket and felt the folded bills. That money was meant for him. It was all he had left until tomorrow, and tomorrow was never guaranteed. For a brief moment, he thought about walking inside, eating quickly, and leaving. No one would blame him. But then he looked at her belly again. He thought about how scared she must be, about how many people must have passed her without stopping. "Come on," he said after a pause. "Let's get you something warm." Her eyes filled with tears instantly. "I don't want trouble," she said quickly. "I'm not begging." "I know," he replied. "You're not. And this isn't trouble. Inside the diner, the smell of food made his hunger worse. He helped her sit in a booth near the window. The waitress gave them a strange look, but didn't say anything. He ordered a full meal and pushed the plate toward her when it arrived. "You should eat," he said. "Take your time." She stared at the food like it might disappear. Then she picked up her fork and began eating slowly at first, then faster as if she realized how hungry she truly was. He watched quietly, pretending not to notice how empty his own stomach felt. Halfway through, she stopped and looked at him. "Aren't you eating?" "I already did," he lied with a small smile. She knew he was lying, but she didn't argue. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sky grew darker. The street was quieter now. When she finished, she leaned back and let out a small breath, like someone who had been holding it for a long time. "Where are you staying?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Nowhere." He nodded slowly. He had no place to offer her. No extra room. No money. And he knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep. "I don't have much," he said honestly. "But you shouldn't be out here alone. There's a shelter 2 streets down. They can help you tonight." She looked away. "They're full." That answer hurt more than he expected. He reached into his pocket again and pulled out the last of the coins he had. He placed them on the table. "It's not much," he said, "but it might help." Her hands trembled as she took them. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing," he said, "and I never forgot it." They walked outside together. The cold night air hit them both. He pointed her in the direction of the shelter and made sure she understood the way. Before she left, she turned back and looked at him. "I'll remember this," she said. "I promise." He nodded, not expecting anything from her. "Just take care of yourself." As she walked away, he stood there for a long time, watching until she disappeared around the corner. His stomach growled, and he felt tired down to his bones. But there was also something else inside him, a quiet feeling he hadn't felt in years. He turned back toward his garage, unaware that the small choice he made that night would one day come back to him in a way he could never imagine. The young girl walked down the quiet street, clutching the small coins in her hand like they were treasure. Her stomach still ached from hunger, but there was something warmer than food inside her chest, a feeling she couldn't name, a tiny spark of hope. She had not known anyone would care about her, really care, not just out of pity. And tonight, a stranger had shown her that kindness could exist, even in the darkest moments. The shelter he had directed her to was small and crowded. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and too many people, but it was warm, and there were beds. Volunteers moved quickly, checking people in and offering blankets. The girl had no choice but to wait in line, and she clutched the coins tightly. The money might be small, but it could buy a few cans of food or a warm drink for her baby. It might not seem like much, but tonight it felt like a lifeline. She thought of the mechanic often that night, how he had sat with her quietly, how he had offered food without judgment. He had asked nothing in return, not even a name. And yet, somehow, that meal had felt like more than just food. It was a reminder that there were good people in the world, people who acted without expecting anything back. Life after that night did not suddenly become easy. The girl had no home, no family who could help, and only a few friends she could trust. She moved from shelter to shelter, couch surfing when she could, always keeping her baby growing safely inside her. She learned quickly how to hide her fear from strangers, how to appear stronger than she felt, and how to keep going when everything around her seemed impossible. The winter months were the hardest. Nights were long, and the cold was relentless. She remembered one night when she had nowhere to sleep and had to huddle in an abandoned bus stop, wrapping her thin jacket around herself as tightly as possible. She thought of the mechanic that night, and for some reason, it made her feel less alone. His small act of generosity gave her courage she didn't realize she had. She found odd jobs whenever she could. Cleaning houses, babysitting, helping in small shops. Every coin she earned was saved carefully, tucked into a small box she kept hidden under her bed. She didn't spend much. She had to prepare for the baby, for the life she was bringing into the world. Even with every obstacle, she pushed forward. She had to. There was no one else to rely on. When the baby was born, it was the most terrifying and beautiful moment of her life. She held the tiny life close, feeling the weight of responsibility in every finger, every breath. The hospital stay was short. She could not afford long care, but she did everything she could to make sure her child was safe. At that moment, memories of the mechanic's kindness returned to her. She remembered the warmth in his eyes, the way he had treated her not like a problem or a burden, but like a human being deserving of care. She promised herself she would not forget that lesson. Years passed. Life remained a constant struggle, but she never lost the determination that had carried her from the streets to a small rented apartment. She learned to cook for herself and her child, to budget every cent, to fix the little problems that came up without asking anyone for help. Every step forward was slow, but it was steady. She often thought about the mechanic. She wondered if he was still alive, if he remembered that night. She had no way to find him, and part of her feared she might never know if she had made any difference in his life, even as she worked long hours. Sometimes late into the night, she never stopped thinking about what kindness meant. She realized that people rarely did good without expecting something in return. And yet, the mechanic had given without any thought of reward. He had given the last meal he could afford to someone he barely knew. She carried that image with her, especially on the days when she felt like giving up. It became a quiet strength, a reminder that even the smallest action could matter more than anyone realized. Her child grew, too, and watching them learn to walk, to talk, to laugh, was the most grounding experience she had ever known. The child was her motivation, her reason to keep pushing forward. She wanted to provide a life better than the one she had been given, to give warmth and safety that had been missing from her own childhood. Every night, she tucked the child in, brushing their hair and whispering promises of love and protection, imagining the mechanic somewhere, still kind, still generous, and hoping that maybe one day she could repay even a fraction of the hope he had given her. The years of struggle hardened her, in some ways, but softened her in others. She knew suffering firsthand, and it made her compassionate in ways most people could never understand. She offered help to those she could, sometimes anonymously, sometimes openly. She understood the power of small acts, the way one kind choice could ripple through someone's life and change it forever. The memory of that first meal, given without expectation, became a symbol for everything she hoped to achieve. A life built not just on survival, but on humanity and care. Despite the distance and the passing years, the mechanic's face remained clear in her mind. She remembered his tired hands, the way he smiled faintly, and the look in his eyes when he offered the food. There was honesty in that moment, a quiet dignity that left a mark on her spirit. She often wished she could tell him how much it meant, how it had kept her going through the darkest times. The thought of finding him sometimes made her stomach twist with fear. What if he didn't remember? What if he was gone, or worse, still struggling and alone? She became more determined. As she slowly built a better life for herself and her child, she kept the dream alive that she would find him one day. The dream was not about repayment alone. It was about connection, about showing that even a single act of kindness could reach across years and circumstances. It was about closing the circle of care that had started that night in the cold, outside a diner in quiet moments. She would sometimes close her eyes and imagine him still in that small garage. Hands greasy, working on engines, probably thinking about bills and meals, and nothing extraordinary. And yet, she knew he had done something extraordinary without knowing it. His generosity had shaped her path, had given her the strength to survive, to fight, and to hope. Through it all, she never forgot the lesson he had taught her. It was simple but powerful. In a world where so many people look the other way, where cruelty often seems louder than compassion, one small act can matter more than anyone realizes. The meal he gave, the warmth he offered, the way he treated her like a person, it was a gift far greater than the coins it cost him. And she would carry that lesson for the rest of her life, making it part of the woman she was becoming, the mother she was trying to be, and the person who one day would pay that kindness forward in ways she had not yet imagined. Years later, as she sat in her modest apartment, holding her child close and watching them sleep, she felt a quiet resolve. She had survived hunger, fear, and despair. She had built a life from nothing. And one day, she promised herself, she would return to the man who had given her that first spark of hope. She would find him, and she would make sure he knew how much his kindness had meant. She would give back in a way that mattered, in a way that honored the gift he had given her. And though she did not yet know it, that day was closer than she imagined. The memory of the mechanic's generosity was alive and strong, guiding her decisions, shaping her choices, and keeping her spirits steady. It was a silent promise between them, unspoken but unbroken. A thread connecting two lives that had barely crossed, but would one day converge again in a way neither of them could foresee. The years of struggle, the nights of worry, the small victories and tiny defeats, all of it had built her into someone capable of compassion and courage. And as she looked at her child, she knew that the mechanic's kindness had not just saved her. It had created a ripple, one that would reach far beyond that cold night, beyond the small diner, beyond the loneliness that had haunted her. It had planted a seed, and now that seed was growing into a life of hope, love, and purpose. She whispered to herself, softly, almost like a prayer, I will find him. I will show him that it mattered. And for the first time in a long while, she felt certain that she would keep that promise. The years passed slowly, almost unbearably for both of them, though in very different ways. The mechanic continued his life in the same small, worn garage, each day blending into the next. Cars came and went, some barely running, some just looking for someone cheap enough to try and fix them. He had stopped keeping track of money or days, or even how old he really was. Life had become a routine of waking, working, and sleeping, with little else. Some nights, he would sit alone in his small room behind the garage, listening to the wind outside and wondering if he had done anything meaningful with his life. He thought about the people he had helped over the years, the neighbors and strangers who came to him when they had no one else. But those memories often faded quickly, leaving him with a sense of emptiness. It wasn't that he regretted helping anyone. On the contrary, he felt proud in small ways. But pride did not pay the bills, it did not fix the leaky roof, and it did not fill the loneliness that had settled into his bones. Meanwhile, the young woman had transformed her life in ways the mechanic could never have imagined. After the struggles of her first few years as a young mother, she had found work at a small company that made household goods. She started at the bottom, cleaning, organizing, doing the work no one else wanted to do. But she was determined. She learned quickly, remembered everything, and never complained, even when others around her did. Slowly, she moved up. She saved every extra coin she could, cutting corners in her own life, so that her child would never go without. Her apartment was small, but it was clean, warm, and filled with love. She made sure to keep it that way, because she knew the feeling of walking into a cold, empty place. She wanted her child to know safety, to know that the world could be gentle if you worked for it, if you held on and tried. At night, she would sit by the window after putting her child to sleep and think about the mechanic. Sometimes she imagined him working late in his garage, tired and alone. She wondered if he had stayed the same, if his hands were still strong enough to hold tools, if he still treated people with the same quiet kindness. The years had shaped her, but they had also hardened her in some ways. She had learned not to trust easily, not to expect help from anyone. Life had taught her that most people looked out for themselves first. But she also knew something deeper, the memory of that one night, when a stranger gave her a meal when he had nothing, had never left her. It was a memory that reminded her that goodness existed, that even in the hardest times, someone could step in and make a difference as she became more successful in her career. She also began to dream of the mechanic more often. She remembered every detail of that night, the way the diner smelled, the quiet way he had spoken, the small smile he gave when she thanked him. She remembered how he had given her his last meal without hesitation, without judgment, and how that act had carried her through the darkest days of her life. She wanted to find him, not just to thank him, but to see the man who had once changed her life in such a simple, yet profound way. The mechanic, on the other hand, rarely thought about the girl after that night. Time had a way of pushing memories aside, especially when survival demanded so much attention. He remembered many customers, many small acts of kindness he had given or received, but the image of the girl faded with the years. He often wondered vaguely if she had been okay, if she had managed to get through her hardships, but it was a fleeting thought, like a shadow passing across a wall. One evening, the mechanic closed his garage early, as he often did when there were no more cars to fix. He walked to the small room behind the garage, rubbing his hands and sighing at the ache in his back. The walls were bare, except for an old calendar, and the bed was neatly made, though the blankets were thin. He sat down and listened to the wind whistle through the cracks in the walls, feeling the loneliness weigh heavily on him. He thought about the life he had lived, about the work he had done, and a quiet sadness settled over him. That same evening, the young woman returned home after a long day at work. She had spent hours meeting clients, managing deliveries, and handling every small problem that arose in her growing career. Her apartment smelled faintly of dinner, which she had prepared quickly for her child. She sat down at the small table, exhausted, and looked out the window. She thought about how far she had come, about the struggles that had brought her here. And then her thoughts drifted to the mechanic. She wondered if he was still alive, if he had managed to live a life with dignity, if he had ever known the impact of that one simple act. The memory of him was stronger than ever. She thought about how small gestures can ripple through life in ways people never expect. She thought about the long nights she had spent worrying about money, about food, about the safety of her child, and how that single meal, that single act of kindness, had given her hope and the strength to keep going. She had carried it with her through every hardship, letting it guide her, reminding her of what was possible. Time passed, and the young woman's career grew. She became more confident, more secure, and more capable of building the life she had always dreamed of. She rented a larger apartment, invested in her business, and created opportunities for herself that she had never imagined. Yet, despite her success, she felt a pull in her heart toward the mechanic, the man who had been a stranger but had given her something far greater than food. She began searching quietly, using the few clues she remembered: the faded sign of the garage, the street where it was located, the general area of the diner. She had no name, no phone number, nothing but the memory of a face and the kindness he had shown. Every search ended in disappointment, but she refused to give up. She knew that somehow she would find him. It was not just a wish. It was a promise to herself and to the memory of that night that had changed everything. Meanwhile, the mechanic continued his quiet life. He fixed cars, spoke to a few regular customers, and occasionally helped someone in need. But the loneliness persisted. He did not know it, but his life was on the edge of change. The kindness he had shown years ago had created a ripple that was moving quietly, steadily toward him. He could not see it yet, could not feel it, but the threads of connection were forming. One day, as he worked on a small car in his garage, he heard the bell above the door ring. A woman stepped inside, her face unfamiliar, but her eyes carried a strange sense of recognition. She approached him slowly, almost cautiously, and stopped a few feet away. The mechanic looked up from the engine and nodded politely, expecting a customer with a simple repair request. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Do you remember me?" He squinted, confused. I'm not sure," he said. "I meet a lot of people here." Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled faintly. "It's been years. I don't know if you remember, but you helped me once. You gave me a meal when I had nothing. You didn't know me, and you didn't ask for anything. I never forgot it." For a moment, the mechanic froze. Something about her voice, the way she looked at him, stirred a memory deep in his mind. He remembered the diner, the coins, the small hands clutching the meal he had given. He remembered a young, frightened girl, scared and alone in the cold. "Wait," he whispered, stepping back from the engine. You're that girl?" She nodded. "Yes, I wanted to find you, to say thank you, to show you that what you did mattered." The mechanic felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: shock, disbelief, and a strange warmth in his chest. He had never thought about that night with expectation. He had never imagined that it would lead to anything, that it could matter to someone years later. And yet, here she was, standing in his garage. Proof that even a small act of kindness could grow beyond anyone's understanding. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of years pressing down on both of them. Outside, the street was quiet, but inside, time seemed to stretch and fold, connecting the past and present in a way that was almost impossible to comprehend. The mechanic felt his hands tremble slightly. He had helped people before, yes, but nothing like this. Nothing that carried such depth, such meaning. I don't know what to say," he finally whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't need to say anything," she replied softly. "I just wanted you to know. I just wanted you to see that your kindness, it changed my life." Tears filled his eyes, and he wiped them quickly with the back of his hand, feeling years of loneliness, worry, and struggle wash over him. He had lived a life of quiet giving, often unnoticed, often unappreciated. But this moment made it clear that every small choice, every act of care, had left a mark. She looked at him and smiled faintly, a mixture of gratitude and relief. "I want to tell you more," she said. "I want to tell you what happened after that night. I want you to see how far it went. But first, I just had to find you." The mechanic nodded slowly, still speechless. He felt a strange mix of joy and disbelief, of hope and amazement. He had never expected anything like this, never imagined that a single act of generosity could circle back in such a powerful way. Outside, the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold. Inside the small, worn garage, two lives that had once crossed briefly in a moment of need were beginning to reconnect in ways neither of them could have imagined. The years of struggle, the nights of hunger, the long days of work and worry, all of it had led to this moment. A quiet but powerful reunion that would change both of their lives forever. And neither of them knew it yet. But the story was far from over. What had begun with a single meal given in kindness was about to grow into something far greater, a bond that would reshape their futures, bring hope, and perhaps even create the family and home they both had been missing. The garage smelled of oil, metal, and old tires just as it always had. The mechanic leaned over the engine he was working on, wiping sweat and grease from his forehead. He had barely looked up when the bell above the door rang. At first, he thought it was just another late customer, someone needing a quick fix or asking for a cheap repair. But the sound of footsteps approaching felt different this time, slower, deliberate, and hesitant. He set the wrench down and wiped his hands on a rag. When he looked up, he saw her standing there, older now, confident, but with the same eyes that had haunted his memory for years. He froze. There was something familiar about her posture, the way she carried herself, the quiet determination in her gaze. His chest tightened, and a strange warmth spread through him. "Can I help you?" he asked cautiously, his voice rough from disuse. She stepped closer, hands slightly trembling but steady. I hope so," she said softly. "Do you remember me?" He squinted, trying to place the face. For a moment, nothing came. His mind searched through years of memories, flashes of faces, cars, small kindnesses. And then it hit him like a spark, lighting up a dark room. He remembered the night outside the diner, the cold air, the small girl clutching her belly, the last meal he had given her. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You're the girl." "From that night?" She nodded, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "Yes, I've been looking for you for a long time." He felt a lump in his throat. He had never thought she would survive, never imagined she would find him years later, standing here in his small, lonely garage. He could barely speak, so stunned was he by the weight of the moment. I don't know what to say," he finally managed, his hands shaking slightly. "You don't have to say anything," she replied gently. "I just wanted you to know that your kindness that night, it changed my life." He felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. He had given her food when he had nothing, a small act in the grand scheme of life, and yet here she was, proof that it had mattered in ways he could never have imagined. His heart thumped in his chest as he tried to find words. I never thought it would matter," he said slowly. "I didn't even think anyone would remember." She smiled faintly, her voice trembling. "I remembered. Every day. That night gave me hope when I had none. It reminded me that someone cared, even when I had nothing. And it helped me survive. It gave me strength when I thought I couldn't go on." The mechanic felt his eyes sting with tears he had long stopped shedding. The years of loneliness, of struggle, of feeling invisible, came rushing back all at once. And now, here was the living proof that even the smallest gesture could change the course of a life. "I don't know how to thank you," she continued. "I wanted to find you, to show you how far it went, how much it mattered." He shook his head slowly, overwhelmed. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I did what anyone should do. I just hoped you'd be okay." "I was," she said, her voice catching. "I had to survive, and I did. And now, I wanted you to see what came from that night. I wanted you to see that you didn't just help me get through one evening. You helped me live." He stepped back from the engine, still staring at her, trying to grasp the reality of what she was saying. For the first time in years, he felt seen not as a mechanic, not as a lonely man struggling to make ends meet, but as a person who had made a real difference in someone's life. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small photograph. It was a picture of her child, smiling, eyes bright, and full of life. "This is part of what your kindness gave me," she said softly. "This is a life you helped me protect." He looked at the photograph and felt a lump rise in his throat. He had never held a baby in his own life. He had never known what it meant to protect someone so completely, to give love without expecting anything back. And now, here it was, in his hands, a symbol of something he had helped create without even realizing it. Tears slipped down his cheeks, and he wiped them quickly. I don't know what to say," he repeated, feeling his voice break. "I never thought. I never imagined. You, all of this." "You don't have to say anything," she said again, smiling gently. "I just wanted you to know, and I wanted to start giving back, to show you that your kindness didn't go unnoticed, that it mattered more than you'll ever know." He felt a strange mix of pride and humility. He had spent so many years thinking that his life was small, that his work and his efforts were invisible. And yet, here was the proof that even the smallest act, a meal, a few coins, a quiet moment of care, could echo across time and space, shaping lives in ways he could never have imagined. They talked for hours that evening. She told him about her struggles, her fears, the nights she had almost given up, the small victories she had achieved, and the life she had built for herself and her child. He listened, overwhelmed, amazed, and grateful that he could hear the story firsthand. Every word she spoke felt like a gift, a way of showing him that he had mattered in a world that often seemed indifferent. "I wanted you to know," she said finally, her voice soft but firm, "that what you did wasn't just a moment. It was a turning point. It was a life-changing act that helped me survive and grow, and I will never forget it." The mechanic felt a deep, quiet joy he hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long time, he felt connected to the world, to someone else, to a life that mattered. He realized that kindness, even when unnoticed, never disappears. It waits, it grows, and it returns in ways that can be more powerful than anyone could ever imagine. As the evening drew on, she stood to leave, but before she went, she reached out and held his hand gently. "I'll be back," she said. "I want to share more with you. I want you to see the life you helped create." He nodded, unable to speak, feeling a mix of gratitude, amazement, and love that he had thought long lost. He watched her leave, walking down the street into the darkening night, and for the first time in years, he felt hope real, tangible hope building inside him. The next days passed slowly, but differently. He went about his work in the garage, fixing cars, talking to customers, but his mind was lighter, his heart warmer. The memory of that evening, of seeing her again, of hearing how his small act had changed her life, stayed with him. For the first time in years, he felt that maybe his life had meaning beyond the work he did with his hands. Then, one afternoon, she returned, this time with her child. The mechanic's heart pounded when he saw the little one, full of energy and laughter, reaching out to him without hesitation. The child's presence was immediate, a living testament to the years that had passed and the life that had been saved and nurtured. He knelt down, unsure, but the child smiled and held out tiny hands. The mechanic laughed, a sound rusty from disuse, but full of warmth. He lifted the child gently, feeling the small weight, the breath, the heartbeat, and in that moment, everything he had done, every sacrifice, every lonely day, felt worthwhile. The young woman watched, tears in her eyes as he held her child, laughing softly, the kind of laugh that comes from deep in the soul. She knew then that he had finally understood something he had never realized before, that the life he had touched had grown, had flourished, and had returned to him in a way more beautiful than he could have imagined. "I wanted you to see this," she said softly, "to see that what you did mattered, to see that you're not alone anymore, that your kindness created something real, something lasting. The mechanic nodded slowly, holding the child close. I don't know what to say, he whispered, tears running freely. I thank you for letting me see this. And in that small, warm garage, surrounded by the smell of oil and engines and the quiet hum of life continuing outside, two lives that had once only briefly crossed were now bound together in a way neither could ever forget. The past, with its struggles, loneliness, and hardship, had led them here to a reunion filled with gratitude, love, and the realization that small acts of kindness could echo across years and change everything. The night fell, and the three of them sat together quietly, the child laughing, the mechanic smiling, and the woman watching, feeling that the world was finally aligned in a way that made sense. It was the beginning of something new, a life where loneliness could be replaced with family, where gratitude could become connection, and where the power of one simple act could shape the course of generations. And though neither of them knew what the future would hold, that evening made one thing clear. Kindness, once given, never disappears. It waits, it grows, and it returns in ways that can bring joy, love, and family into the most unexpected places. The mechanic had never imagined that his life could change so completely. The small garage that had been his entire world, the place where he had spent years fixing broken cars and struggling to make ends meet, suddenly felt brighter. Not because the walls were cleaner or the tools newer, but because the room was filled with laughter, warmth, and the presence of people who cared. For the first time in years, he felt something he had thought lost forever: hope. The young woman had returned to the garage more often, bringing her child each time. She had insisted he meet them both properly, that he see how far she had come, and how strong her life had become despite the hardships. Each visit, the mechanic watched the child grow, laughed at their playful antics, and slowly began to feel the weight of years lift from his shoulders. He realized that the act of kindness he had performed so long ago had not only helped someone survive, but had created a bond stronger than he had ever experienced in his entire life. One afternoon, as he worked on a car, the woman approached him with a hesitant smile. "I want to do something for you," she said. "Something to make sure you never have to struggle again." He looked up from the engine, puzzled. I don't understand," he said slowly. "You've already given me so much just by coming here, by letting me see how things turned out. I never expected anything else." She shook her head gently. "No, this isn't about expectation. It's about giving back. You gave me everything you had when I needed it the most, and now I want to make sure you have a life that's safe, comfortable, and full of love. You deserve it." He didn't know how to respond. He had lived so long with very little that the idea of being given anything more, of being taken care of, seemed almost impossible. He felt a knot in his throat, unsure if it was gratitude, disbelief, or fear of losing his independence. But the woman's eyes were steady, kind, and determined, and he realized that there was no argument to be made against the sincerity in her voice. A week later, she returned with a set of keys in her hand. "I bought a house for you," she said softly. "It's not far from mine. I wanted you to have a place where you're safe, warm, and can finally rest without worry. It's your home now." The mechanic held the keys as if they were fragile. He looked around the garage one last time, feeling the weight of years pressing down, memories of struggle and loneliness flooding his mind. And yet, he felt lighter than he had in decades. A house, a home, something he had never dared to dream of, something he had thought was impossible, was now his dot. They drove together to the small house she had bought for him. It wasn't large, but it was clean, bright, and filled with the kind of warmth that money could never buy. She had furnished it simply, with care, leaving space for him to make it his own. There were blankets on the beds, fresh food in the cupboards, and a small garden outside that begged to be tended. He stepped inside slowly, taking it all in, the reality pressing down on him. "This is mine?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yes," she said, smiling. "Yours? You don't have to worry about anything anymore. No bills piling up, no nights of hunger, no loneliness. You have a home, a family, and people who care about you." He felt tears slip down his cheeks. The kind of tears that came after years of pain and struggle. Tears that washed away despair and filled the space with something new peace. I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice trembling. "You don't need to," she replied. "Just live. Be happy. That's all I ask." The child ran around the house, laughing and exploring every corner. The mechanic watched, his heart swelling with a joy he had never known. He realized that this was what life could be, a home filled with laughter, love, and connection. He had spent so long alone, thinking that his life had little meaning, but now he understood that meaning had been waiting for him all along. It had been in the act of kindness he had given years ago, and now it had returned, multiplied beyond his imagination. Days turned into weeks, and the mechanic slowly settled into his new home. The small house became a place of comfort, a place where he could rest without worry, where the walls held warmth and laughter instead of silence and ache. He spent time with the child, teaching small lessons about tools and engines, playing games and listening to their endless stories. He and the young woman grew closer as well, not out of obligation, but out of a shared bond that had been forged in kindness and strengthened by years of perseverance. The community around them noticed the change. People who had only known the mechanic as a quiet, tired man now saw someone transformed, smiling, lively, and filled with a new purpose. And yet, he never forgot the small beginnings, the nights of hunger, the quiet moments of struggle that had shaped him. He often looked back at the memory of the diner and the young girl he had fed, remembering that one small act had changed the entire course of his life. One evening, as the three of them sat together in the warm living room, the mechanic reflected on everything that had happened. He realized that life had a strange way of working out. The struggles, the pain, the loneliness, they were not wasted. They had led him to this moment, to a home, a family, and a sense of belonging he had never thought possible. He looked at the young woman, then at the child, and felt a deep gratitude, not just for their presence, but for the chance to live fully, to love, and to be loved in return. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought life could be like this for me. I thought I'd always be alone, struggling and forgotten." "You're not alone anymore," she replied gently, "and you never will be. You've given more than you know, and now it's your turn to receive. You deserve this, and I want you to take it fully. This is your family too." He nodded, feeling the words sink in, feeling the weight of years lift from his shoulders. For the first time, he allowed himself to hope for the future, to dream, to imagine a life not defined by struggle, but by connection, love, and stability. The days that followed were filled with small joys. They cooked together, played in the garden, and laughed at the child's endless curiosity. The mechanic found himself learning about love in ways he had never known, understanding that family was not just blood, but connection, care, and shared moments. Every act of kindness he had given, every patient hour he had spent helping others, had returned to him in this life, wrapped in gratitude, laughter, and love. Neighbors noticed the change in him too. They would smile as he walked by with the child holding his hand, or hear laughter spilling from the small house, where before there had been silence. The mechanic realized that life had a rhythm, and he was finally moving to one that felt full, meaningful. And right that one quiet night, As he sat on the porch, looking at the stars, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. The diner, the cold night, the small act of giving his last meal. It seemed so small then, but now it had led to something extraordinary. He understood something deeply that night. Life is not measured by wealth, success, or recognition, but by the impact of kindness, by the love given and received, and by the connections formed along the way. He thought of all the lonely nights, all the days of struggle, and all the people he had helped without expectation. He realized that even when life seems small, even when you feel invisible, the choices you make matter. They echo quietly, often unseen, shaping lives in ways you may never fully understand. The young woman came out to join him, carrying a blanket. She sat beside him, her hand finding his, a simple gesture filled with meaning. The child had fallen asleep inside, tired from a day of play and laughter. Together, they watched the night sky, feeling the peace that only comes from safety, love, and belonging. "You've given me more than you know," she said softly. "And now it's my turn to give back. I want you to know that this home, this family, it's because of you. And I hope you can finally see your life for what it really is, a life full of meaning, love, and impact." He squeezed her hand gently, tears welling in his eyes. I never imagined this," he whispered. "I never thought I'd have." This is just the beginning," she replied with a smile. "There's so much more ahead. And now we face it together as family." For the first time, the mechanic truly understood the power of kindness, the beauty of connection, and the meaning of family. He had started with nothing, given what little he had, and ended up with everything he had ever needed: a home, a family, and the knowledge that a single act of generosity could echo through time to create life, love, and hope. And as the stars twinkled above, he finally felt whole, finally understood that the hardest moments in life could lead to the most extraordinary blessings. The house, the laughter, the family, they were all proof that kindness never goes unnoticed, and that even the smallest gesture can return in ways far beyond imagination. From that night on, the mechanic lived with a heart full of gratitude, a spirit renewed, and a life that had been transformed by a single choice made in the cold, quiet darkness years ago. He finally knew that he was not alone, that he was loved, and that the ripples of one kind act could truly change the course of a lifetime.